everyone. Welcome back to my channel. I keep doing this really late at night. I've just got in from Hever Castle, which is not actually that far from where I live, and been at a fantastic history festival there. And actually, while I was there, I was talking to some of the historians about the stuff I've been doing on football and the First World War. And it got me thinking, I'm actually going to do a video about football in the First World War. So the title of this video is Facts You May Not Have Known About Football and the Great War. Little bit of a word to the wise. If you really don't want to hear anything about Spurs, I suggest you turn off now, because I have got one little fact about Spurs. But when you see why I have actually added a fact about Spurs, I think you might actually be okay with me doing it. So what people don't realise is the football in the First World War is actually really, really interesting. As somebody that's always done a lot of things to do with the First World War, I've just come back from France and Belgium, going to the Somme region and to Ypres to actually look at the Arsenal players and former Arsenal players who fought and died in the First World War. And I was really lucky to be able to find some of them. I'm going to be doing some videos on them, and I'm going to be doing one video on each. Now, there is a really interesting set of stuff about the 1914-15 team anyway, but there's also some really interesting facts about a lot of these players, including a false report that one actually got killed that didn't. So let's start off by actually looking at facts that you might not have known about football. So when the war was actually declared in 1914, on the 4th of August 1914, the FA, obviously the Football Association, were hoped they would follow the example of the cricket and actually suspend the matches. They didn't suspend the matches straight away, and actually it wasn't until after the 1914-15 season and after the FA Cup they actually suspended them. Little facts you might not have known: the winner of the 1914-15 season, I believe, was Everton, and the season before, I believe that there was yeah, it was 1913, wasn't it? The season before, I believe we nearly got relegated. The only time in our history. Please correct me if I'm wrong, everybody. But what is really interesting is that, as you know, as Arsenal fans, as me as well, one of the best things that we can really be really good advocates for, which, let's face it, is something that we are really proud of, is our ladies team. Okay, everyone's been going on about the Lionesses, and I don't know about you guys, but me as an Arsenal fan, I've been sitting here going, yeah, we've had this in the bag for quite a while. Like, we've actually had a pretty good team. But did you know that women and football is not a new thing? In fact, women in football was something that was quite prevalent in the First World War. People don't actually realise that. Women in football was incredibly important. And I'm going to talk to you and explain to you why that is. So we will go and have a look at this. So this team here, this is actually munitions factory workers. Now, did you know that there was over 900,000 women in the First World War that actually worked in munitions factories? And they were encouraged, like the men at the front, to actually participate in some recreational activities. One of the things that they did actually participate in was football. Here you can actually see in the image on the screen that this is the Associated Equipment Company munitions factory of Beckton, London. If you actually don't look really carefully, you think that says AFC, and that did shock me at the I was like, oh, is this the Arsenal ladies? But no, it wasn't. So they actually, there was a league that was established. The most famous is not this one. It's Dick Kerr's Ladies FC in Preston, which was actually founded in 1917, so 1 year before the end of the war. Their matches actually did draw quite large crowds, probably because the men's football wasn't on by this point. It was suspended, and, you know, people wanted to have something to entertain them, and why not go to a game of football, even if it's played by the women, which, let's face it, back then was something that wasn't really done. But equally, these women had proved themselves in all sorts of different jobs in the First World War because the men were away. They continued to enjoy success until women were banned from playing football in 1921, believe it or not. matches were played from different factories, kind of like how we see different towns now. A cup competition was actually established. And like I said, the picture that you can see there, the Associated Equipment Company did actually do incredibly well, which I think is pretty cool, to be fair. Now, next slide. This is not going to come as any shock to anybody that football was quite a big recreational thing on the Western Front. Not only the Western Front, though, it was actually used by many people as a way to keep the troops fit. It wasn't only a way of keeping the troops fit, it was actually a way to recruit people as well, which we're going to look at a bit more of that later. But there was, people often think that when you see images of the First World War and you see films about the First World War and stuff like that, predominantly it will be to do with the trenches. And people always think that that was pretty much where everything went on. A lot of the time, a lot of the men were behind the trenches and they were waiting to go to the front. People don't always remember that there was a frontline trench and a reserve trench. And then there was also the men back. And it did vary, but on average, the average man actually was in the trenches for about, I think it was about 10 days. So therefore, there was quite a lot of time on rotation where they were sitting around. Now, if you imagine boredom setting in any time is terrible. Imagine setting it in when you know that you could be facing an inevitable, like you could be facing a slaughter. You don't know if you're going to be alive tomorrow. You're going to have to do quite a lot of stuff to actually occupy yourself. Football was really important. Not only was it great for morale, it was great for team building. That the men in charge actually believed it was a great way to keep the men fit and equally to keep their minds focused on what they were going to do. In fact, the photo that you're seeing was actually taken in September 1916. It shows a football match in progress by the 1st Battalion Wiltshire Regiment at Bozincourt of the Somme. So we're going to look a little bit more about the Somme further on. But football wasn't only used as something for recreation. Sport in itself was used for propaganda, to the point that it was also used for, like we said before, sporting battalions. Now, you can see from this poster, it's used as a recruitment tool. Football was it's a massive sport now. It was a massive sport back then. If you actually have a look at the text on the poster, you'll actually see that it says the need for more recruits for our army is very urgent. Appeals should be necessary. It should not be necessary. Every man must know his duty to himself and to his country. There are approximately 3 million men with no family responsibilities. I mean, that's quite brazen, isn't it? You've got no reason to not go. Get your backsides out to France and Flanders. There are approximately 3 million, like I said. I ask these to show that they are good sportsmen and enlist now and help the other good sportsmen who are so bravely fighting Britain against the world's enemy. So you were actually encouraged to join up to sportsmen's battalions. There were also footballing battalions that we're going to look at a bit further down the line as well. It's mental to think that sport not only played such a positive role, but you can also argue kind of played a bit of a negative role as well, because at the end of the day, let's be totally honest, this is leading men to slaughter, right? And the fact that it can be used as something that is, quite challenging, quite scary, quite having an inevitable outcome is something that I think is quite shocking, to be fair. Right, next one I want to show you on my list of facts you may not have known. Now, people think that it was only the English that played football in the First World War. As we know from the Christmas truce, which I'm going to look at a bit later on with you, that wasn't actually the case at all. In fact, prisoners of war were encouraged to also play football. We actually see that quite a lot in a lot of the camps in the Second World War as well. And you can actually see here, this is a football that is owned by the Imperial War Museum, which was a football that was taken from a prisoner of war after the end of the First World War. So that in itself, I think, is pretty incredible, really. Not only that, but this football, much more specifically, was presented by Lieutenant Jack Shaw. He used to organise these games. Holzminden Camp is where these games were actually organised, and it was by his his fellow officer prisoners of war, which again, I think is really, really incredible. Now, I have one of these, which I'm about to show you. Really weird. I'm having real trouble getting my, like, I look really tiny on this screen, but I know if I do that, I'm going to get rid of my picture. Look, aren't I? There we go. Don't really want to be doing that. I want to go back and add me into there, but going to just have to stick with me being a little bit small. It's fine. I'm sure you'd rather look at the pictures that I'm going to have on the screen anyway. So I've got one of these, somewhere at my parents' house. I'm going to find it and do a silly little stream of me trying to play it because it's actually really fun to play. Trench football, as you can see at the top, it's the really scary, I believe it's the Kaiser meant to be up there at the top, and you've got to somehow get the ball through the trench away from the Kaiser. These are really common kids' toys. This one is a British made game. It was used not only as recreation, it was used for kids, but it was a propaganda tool. It was poking fun at the Kaiser, which is exactly what the British wanted people to do. And also they didn't know how long the war was going to go out on. As horrible as this sounds, this is probably used to sort of almost brainwash kids so that they can then go and fight, which is, I don't know about you, but I think that's a little bit grim. Anyway, you can still pick these up. I think the Imperial War Museum sell them. They're about sort of this big. They are quite fun. Like I said, I have one. I will sort of show it to you if I can find it from my parents. This is a really interesting picture. So this picture is not from, we always associate, the First World War a lot of the time with France and Belgium. I know that I do whenever I think about it. But this is actually a really interesting picture of officers versus other ranks. It's a 26th Divisional Ammunition Train was brought these men in. So it's members of that. And it's actually near Salonika on Christmas Day, 1915. Sports such as football was seen as a good way for officers to develop their leadership skill and forge links with their men. What I found really interesting about looking at this stuff is actually that when I watched it, I'm sure you guys did, the Arsenal series All or Nothing, and I actually found that a lot of the strategies that Arteta uses to bring his dressing room together, the sort of like little starter activities, the things he gets people to think, they're quite things like I use in my classroom as a teacher, and equally things that I think that they would have probably used it in the Western Front and all over the different various theatres of war. And interestingly, I do think that they are quite good developed tactics. There's a really, it's still quite an emotional argument. What they call the lions led by donkeys argument, which is whether the men actually in charge knew what they were doing, or they were just sort of, they bought their ranks and their commissions, and they didn't really care about the men that they were in charge of, and these poor men were led out to slaughter. And there's other historians that say that that's not necessarily true. I would argue that these sort of pictures, these sort of activities that went on, the people in charge actively trying to build relationships with the soldiers that are below them in the ranks, I think kind of shows that the lions led by donkeys argument may have some flaws, simply because why would they bother doing this if indeed it was just all about trying to, these men were cannon fodder and so on and so forth. Now, the next one I know you gooners here are going to love. I didn't know this until I started doing this research, that there were baseball games played at Arsenal. Please tell me in the comments below if you knew this, because I most certainly did not. That after the entry of the Americans, after the sinking of the Lusitania, the Americans come into the war in 1917. There is a lot of them that end up being here because before they go over and actually are in the Western Front and other theatres of war. And one of the things that the British tried to do to sort of formulate relationships and try and make them feel less like they were homesick was actually to have baseball games. One of the places they had the baseball games was at Highbury. And as you can see here, this is the 17 to 18 season. So this is like a pre-season friendly. Like we've just had our pre-season friendlies in America, haven't we? So it's a very similar situation. August the 24th, the US Navy versus Epsom at Gillespie Road, Highbury, Arsenal football ground. I just think that's brilliant. I mean, can you imagine? This would have been like the Emirates Cup of its day. Go back to when you went to your first Emirates Cup after we moved into the Emirates, thinking how singing, all dancing, all sparkly and shiny it was. That's going to be what what Highbury would have looked like back then. And I think, you know what a beautiful sight to see. I mean, I've got you. I always forget I'm going the wrong way in these things. I've got my Highbury back there, and I still love looking at it and what it used to look like. I used to go to Highbury when I was a kid. And you know, if you've seen Fever Pitch, that feeling when he comes up the stairs and he sees that beautiful Art Deco stadium that was Highbury, those chills, that I still get the chills watching that clip, the same as I got the very first time my dad took me to the Emirates. So yeah, this post is really interesting. I'm going to show a bigger version of this on my Twitter. If you want to follow me on there, at Lambeth Walk 2211, and you'll see some more Arsenal stuff that I've been posting. Right. I want to bring you onto this one, because you cannot talk about football in the First World War without talking about the Christmas truce. Now, there are actually some myths about the Christmas truce. I am going to do a whole video about that later on, probably closer to Christmas. Otherwise, it doesn't really seem to have much relevance, does it? But there are various different stories about the Christmas truce. Letters and diaries do describe the truce, mentions opposing troops kicking around footballs. There are things that were given from British soldier to a German soldier, such as the Imperial War Museum has a beautiful German beer stein that was apparently given over to a British Tommy from a German soldier. There are different accounts of different football games going on. The image that is on the screen is from the 2014 Sainsbury's advert, which as a teacher, I show that to my kids. It might not be super historically accurate, but it does give the feeling of what the Christmas truce was. The idea that the soldiers were heard singing, they came over the trenches, they played a game of football. Traditionally, it's believed the games took place between the 25th and the 26th of December 1914. And like I say, I will go into more detail about that. We know that the England-Germany thing is very much ongoing because of 2 world wars, and it was, you know, and then we did win the 1966 World Cup against West Germany. So there is a very much a football, there is a footballing-ish connection that will always be associated with the First World War. You know, you've probably heard it, I've heard it, the pitch nicknamed No Man's Land. There is definitely footballing language. You may not also know this, but one footballing connection that does connect Arsenal Football Club to the Battle of the Somme is there are actually quite a few at the time of the 14-15 season, players that were playing at the time and previous players of Arsenal that had died in the Battle of the Somme. The Battle of the Somme lasted roughly 100 days. People always think of the 1st of July 1916, but it actually went on for quite a while. And some of the players that I was able to find that were either in the current team or had played at Arsenal at one time, they quite a lot of them are from 1916, which I said I'm going to do a video on at a later date. Interestingly as well, there was a connection to football with the Middlesex Regiment. Middlesex Regiment in itself is quite hugely connected to football because there was footballing battalions within the Middlesex Regiment, which we're going to look at a little bit more. So this is a poster. I absolutely love this image. This is a poster, recruitment poster for the footballing battalion. So the footballing battalion, so it was a 17th Service Battalion of the Middlesex Regiment. They were an infantry battalion, and they were part of the British Army. Initially, they were a PALS battalion. So PALS battalions was what it says on the tin, everyone. You got your friends together and you went and joined up. They were originally a group of professional footballers. That's where the name actually comes from. They were also made up of the 23rd Service Battalion of the Middlesex Regiment, which was later formed in June 1915, and it became known as the 2nd Footballing Battalion. Now, the battalions fought at the Battle of the Somme in 1916. And there is, if you go, one of the really famous battles, people think of the Battle of the Somme. Like I said, has been like one battle. There were various other pockets of things that went on. One of them was the Battle of Deville Wood. Now, Deville Wood, if you manage to go there in the Somme region, you will see that there is actually a memorial to the Middlesex Regiment, also known as the Footballing Battalion. However, this is where I said, if you're really, 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 really anti-Spurs, look away now, because I am actually going to talk about a particular Spurs player. And that particular Spurs player, if I just change my image across, is a gentleman by the name of Walter Toll. Now, Walter Toll was part of the Middlesex Regiment. He did win the Victoria Cross. He was a Tottenham Hotspur player. He actually gets killed on, I believe it's the 25th of March. I believe it is the 25th. Yes, it is the 20th of March. He's buried. What's that? He's buried in Favril-Pas-de-Calais. So he was 29 when he died in 1918. And he was his family were actually originally from Barbados. In fact, his paternal grandmother was actually a slave in Barbados. His maternal English grandmother was from Kent. He was born in Folkestone, so actually not too far from where I currently reside. I don't remember ever seeing anything that Spurs have done for him. Maybe that's my like little slide dig at Spurs shoved in there. But he is definitely someone that when we have Black History Month at work, being a teacher, I always talk about Walter Toll. I think it's important. He won, I believe he won the Victoria Cross for bravery, which is another reason why he should be remembered. But he actually wasn't playing for Tottenham when the First World War broke out. He actually left Tottenham in 1911. When the war broke out, he was actually with Northampton Town. And then he also, I think, signed up to Rangers as well. So, you know, maybe we can sort of let him off there. He was actually... he did win the Victoria Cross for bravery. Sadly, he was killed in the First World War, and I believe he was one of the first mixed heritage upper ranks. I believe he was a lieutenant in the First World War. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Oh no, he was a second lieutenant. So a little bit of props there to Walter Toll. But like I said, this isn't an Arsenal channel. And I know that you're probably, some of you out there probably going, what are you doing talking about Spurs player? But I think that, you know, when someone's given their life for our country and there's quite a lot of bravery going on, let's all take our hats off to Walter Toll because he's quite interesting. And I'm pretty sure the picture I picked is not a Spurs kit. So hopefully that's right. Now, moving on to the very last gentleman. There is a massive list of Arsenal players and former Arsenal players to do with this period that I want to really look a lot more detail at, as well as the regiments they were in and where they fought. Because being a history teacher, it's not only the current Arsenal team I love, which, by the way, I'm going to do a video tomorrow about the PFA Team of the Year, which isn't we've just had 5 players named in that. Not Starboy, which upset me, but there is some blooming amazing players in there, which we're going to look at. But I want to talk to you very briefly before I go about this gentleman, William Spittle. Now, William Spittle is a very interesting guy because he's known as Billy Spittle, which that's a blooming great football name, isn't it? He actually played 7 times for Woolwich Arsenal between 1913 and 1914. He was never part of a winning team, but he did join the Footballers Battalion and he played for their team, scoring in the Royal Garrison Artillery in 1916. He was also in the squad for the Flanders Cup. Now, I want to research more about the Flanders Cup. I love the fact that in amongst all this horror that's going on, they have actually been able to have their own leagues. The pool of football is so strong, they have their own leagues. So it was an inter-battalion football competition that, unsurprisingly, the Football Battalion won in April 1916. While Spittle remained at Arsenal until October 1919, he never played for the first team again. I just think that's a great name. I mean, I'd love to read a comic book, The Adventures of Billy Spittle. I just think it sounds really amazing. One thing I did discover while reading and doing some research about players in the First World War was I actually found out that so many of them, if they did return home, they never played again because of shrapnel injuries, because of gas injuries, or just because of the horrors they saw. They just didn't really have, sadly, a love of the game anymore, which I think is really, really heartbreaking. But anyway, aside from that, I want to say thank you for joining me. I've really enjoyed doing this. If there's anything more about this you want to know, anything more you think you'd like me to cover, please put a message in the chat below, in the comments below. Please like and subscribe to the channel. Check me out on Twitter, at Lambethwalk2211. It's not a very Arsenal name, but it's to do with the fact that I'm a very proud Lambeth girl, born and bred. And before anyone gives me the rubbish about the fact that I was born in South London, just remember, so were the Arsenal, and especially at the time I'm looking at. See you later.